Hi, I'm Sam Payton, AIPAC's Assistant Director of Policy and Government Affairs. Today we're sitting down with Congressman Bacon, who represents Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. Congressman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate being here.
So I just want this to be a lighthearted conversation and allow a chance for our members to get to know you a little better. You have a very unique background, so I want to ask, tell us how you started out as an Illinois farm boy and went to Air Force Brigadier General and ended up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for having me here today, too. I was raised on a corn and soybean beef cattle farm, and I was working the farm since I was a little kid, doing the small jobs, mowing the grass. Graduated at 21 on the farm before I went in the Air Force. I was disking, planting, doing everything you do on the farm. But I used to bale hay 4 times a year in Illinois, and I was in charge of all the manure. So it's a good upbringing. It learns you how to work hard, a great work ethic. But I always enjoyed military history and political stuff, so that was my hobbies. I had a dirt bike too. Those are the 3 things I liked: dirt bikes, I love studying politics, I love studying military history. And at the age of 21, I was a college graduate, working on the farm. My grandfather and my dad were also business people, but that stuff never really appealed to me too well, and I was trying to figure out where to go. And I talked to this retired lieutenant colonel, a fighter pilot. He was in charge of a Youth for Christ ministry in my hometown. He was good friends with my dad. He says, "Don, you're always reading military history books. Have you ever thought about joining the military?" And so the next day I signed up.
Wow, next day.
After I talked to my wife first, though.
That's always good, yeah.
But so I joined the Air Force at 21, and I felt like God blessed along the way. I got to command 5 times, 2 squadrons, a squadron that was in Iraq for the invasion of Iraq, a combat group where we had 2 squadrons deployed, one in Afghanistan, one in Iraq. Was a 2-time base commander, Ramstein, and also Offutt Air Force Base, which I love doing. I really enjoyed working with people, and I enjoyed the mission. So I think I woke up every day excited about what I was doing, and I could have done it 15 hours a day, and it wasn't work. It was fun. And that was really 90% of my Air Force time was like that. And I was also very pleased that I got to work with Israel and setting up long-range missile defense when I was a colonel. And so that was one of my highlights in the Air Force.
Well, I have to confirm our Great Plains state stereotype. I'm from a few states south in Oklahoma and also grew up working on a family farm. How big was your farm? Is it still in the family?
It's still in the family. It's about 1,000 acres when I grew up, and which was in the 60s and 70s. That was a fairly good-sized farm. And today, though, with the big equipment, it's easy to farm 2,000 or 3,000 acres as a family farm. These farms are consolidating. Yeah, it was about 1,000 acres, mainly corn and soybeans. Then we had a little bit of a cattle operation as well.
Well, I'm sure that your work ethic really shows from that start into today in Congress.
My dad told me when I'm going to school, Don, when you're going to school, you got to have 2 jobs. If you have 1 job and you're going to school, you're a slacker. Yeah. So I would work at the farm, I was going to school, and work in a restaurant at night.
Wow, that's incredible.
And that was just to stay out of trouble with my dad.
Yeah. So diving a little into your military career, you have a very unique experience. Few members of Congress really have the background that you do in the military, serving at Ramstein, working on missile defense, working with the Israelis on a weekly, daily basis on some of their threats and challenges. Can you talk about how your military experience shaped your view of the Middle East, of the threats we face together, and Israel's role in the region?
When I look at my military career, I came in '85, got out in 2014. It's interesting how the threats changed over time. It was initially the Soviet Union, and then we had North Korea. It's always been a problem. Then we had Iraq in the 90s. Over time, Iran became a growing threat through all of that. Here's a regime that's sworn the destruction of Israel. They have 1,000 ballistic missiles that can hit Israel. They're the largest exporter of terror. They're the ones who arm Hamas and Hezbollah. And that problem has grown over time. It's something that I've studied a lot. Then, of course, I've had to work with counterterrorism efforts as well, and some of that's related to Iran, but not all of it. But out of that, I've gained an appreciation for the Israeli military. I've been able to travel there. I worked with the Arrow missile system.
What was some of that interaction with the Israelis like?
Well, I was mainly working their missile defense system, so we were focused on being able to intercept Iranian missiles over Iraq. And so the Israelis have a great missile capability with the Arrow, but we helped put in the radar that could see a long ways off. And then when you cue that up with an infrared satellite, you can know instantly when a country's launching a missile, where it's going, and then you can synchronize your satellite to look in the right spot, and it saves you like 4 or 5 minutes of decision time. So that was my role when I was working with the Israelis, to help with the satellite eyes and the radar eyes, working with the Israeli interceptor. And I think we developed a great system. But I realized just how precarious of a situation Israel's in through my years of doing this. You know, you look in the West Bank, you can see the Mediterranean, right? And there's a great quote that I think is absolutely true, that the first battle that Israel loses will be the last battle. And I think America has an obligation to make sure that doesn't happen.
Wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment, yeah. So you mentioned intelligence, Iran, kind of threats we face, and you worked on missile defense. Is there any military technology of the future that kind of excites you that you think the U.S. and Israel could work on together?
Well, there's a lot. You know, Israel has their own Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv.
Right.
And it's one of the two main hubs in the world for startups and new technology, software development. And so there's so much opportunity when it comes between U.S. and Israel working together on artificial intelligence, for example. In that whole area, we can learn from each other. And I don't think it's one leading the other. I think it's a cooperative relationship. And I've seen in so many different areas with U.S. Israel where, so for example, we'll develop a seeker head on a missile. The Israelis will acquire it. They'll work on it, make it better, then we acquire it back. And we see that iterative relationship when it comes to technology. Here's another one, Iron Dome. So U.S. and Israel work together on Iron Dome, and I think the system would be less if only it was one or the other. Because it was both, it's an incredible system we could both take a lot of pride in. So there's so much opportunity when it comes to the technology side between U.S. and Israel to work together. And that's where we're going. Artificial intelligence, cyber, electronic warfare, all this stuff's interrelated. And Israel has a lot to offer there, and so do we. I mean, it's a team.
Right. Israel is forced to constantly innovate because of the threats on all of its borders, and our relationship really isn't just about the United States helping Israel. We get so many benefits from all the technologies that you're talking about, and those are great ideas. Yeah.
Not only that, where's the F-35 been used at in combat role?
Right.
So Israel takes a lot of our systems, they actually use it, and we learn from it, and then we make it better. So this relationship's a win-win relationship. And even beyond that, when it comes to intelligence, we have incredible satellite intelligence and worldwide collection capability, but the Israelis have access to intelligence we don't have on the ground. And again, that's a win-win relationship for both sides. We map the world every day.
Transitioning from active service discussion to a little bit of your veterans work, you were actually the guest of honor at one of our very first veterans outreach events in 2017 with
I remember that.
Yeah, Andrew Ashford, our great veterans outreach director. So I want to kind of hear, why do you think veterans advocacy on foreign policy issues is so important?
Only 1% of our country right now serves in the military, and it's about 5%, maybe 6% are veterans. So it's a small group who have deployed to the Middle East, worked in Europe, that have this national security perspective that a veteran brings to the table. So it's less than 6%. And I think that we can appreciate the challenges of Israel, for example. I've had a chance to work with Israeli military, and I worked with their aero defense system, and a combination of things like that. I think it's our voice is needed in American discourse, because the 94% have not been deployed, have not had to work on national security matters. And so I think, being that we're the small group that has deployed multiple times, we've seen combat, we've worked with different countries, that voice is needed in our country. And in the Congress, it's bigger than 6%, it's about 18%, but it used to be 75% were veterans, right? Now we're down to about 18%. And many of them served one term or two. You have a small cadre that have done it for a career. That voice is very important in discussing our national security priorities. We know what it's like to fly a 40-year-old aircraft. The B-52 was made in 1961, the youngest one that we're flying. I think that voice is needed into our political discussions.
I think veterans outreach and activism is just so unique, and it gets so much respect that it's extremely important, right? And you work on so many issues in this area, such as post-traumatic stress.
Right.
You lead a caucus focused on traumatic brain injuries. Do you see a space for cooperation between U.S. and Israel on some of these veterans' issues, and what kind of benefits would that have?
I've gained an appreciation for both traumatic brain injury issues and post-traumatic stress, especially after my 4 deployments in the Middle East, where I had a little tinge of post-traumatic stress after my 1 year in Baghdad, where we were on the receiving end of rocket and mortar attacks every day, sometimes 3 on the small side or low side, on bad days 30 rocket or mortar attacks. And so it gave me an appreciation for this whole issue. And Israel has the same reality, whether it's in the north area where the Hezbollah are at, or as we've seen just this past year with Hamas firing 4,000 to 5,000 rockets into southern Israel, that folks on the receiving end of that will, if you're near a concussion or near an explosion, that concussion of the explosion affects the brain. And so that's the traumatic brain injury part. Plus, being on the receiving end of that creates post-traumatic stress as well. So I think our experience coming out of Afghanistan and Iraq, and then the reality of what Israel has every year, there's an opportunity for us to learn from each other and share the lessons that we have. And we have some great medical expertise that put a lot of effort into this. And I think Israel could gain from it, and I have no doubt that Israel's doing the same thing.
I mean, just last year, over 100 American service members suffered traumatic brain injuries when Iran, not Iran's proxies, but Iran directly fired ballistic missiles at one of our bases, one of the coalition bases in Iraq. I mean, this just underscores our shared threats and challenges together.
And one of the things that strikes me on that whole attack, we had to send a large group of people home. We didn't know who had TBI or traumatic brain injury, who didn't. But today we have a new technology which I helped fund with our traumatic brain injury caucus. There's equipment today the size of a cell phone, and you can take it into Iraq, Afghanistan, or Israel, wherever the conflict is at. And after say a large rocket hits by and some people may be injured, you don't know, you can take blood, and within an hour or two, you will know who has traumatic brain injury by the blood markers.
That's so interesting.
And so this is new technology. So instead of sending 200 people home, of which maybe 40 have traumatic brain injury, you can send those 40 home. And you can know who has a traumatic brain injury within about 2 hours after an attack.
Wow, was this a legislative initiative in Congress, or?
Well, we funded the research, and that was one of the outcomes of the research.
Wow.
And so this is a capability that I think will, it preserves combat capability in the theater. Instead of taking 200 people home, you can take the people home who really need it, and you can determine that within short time frame.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, the work you do is just so unique, and I know our members really appreciate this conversation. As we begin to wrap up, we have some fun questions, some kind of lightning rounds, if you just answer a little quickly. We've heard you're a big craft beer guy. I don't know if that's right.
I'm about an everything guy. I'm an Air Force guy. I drink it all.
IPAs, stouts?
I'm a lager guy. I particularly like Bavarian lagers. They're full, higher alcohol content. They taste good. But any lager is great. I've enjoyed Mexican lagers.
So you're not picky?
I'm not picky. Yeah. I'm a farm kid, military guy. My favorite beer is a free one.
I agree with that. Nebraska, big beef state. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think it's the only state that exports beef to Israel. How do you take your steak? I got to ask.
Medium rare, and they're all good.
Yeah.
I grew up on the farm. My grandmother had 4 freezers of steaks.
Wow, 4 freezers.
Yeah. Well, we
hard to beat.
We produced our own steaks, obviously,
yeah,
right? And so I probably had steak 4 or 5 times a week. If it wasn't that, I was having round steaks or steak, you name it.
Congressman, this has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Do you have any parting words for the pro-Israel activists listening today?
I think the U.S. has an obligation here in many ways. So from a moral obligation, if you study the history of the Jewish people, we need a homeland or a safe haven. There has been persecution and anti-Semitism, obviously for centuries and millenniums. And that's the reason we have Israel today, and I think the U.S. has a moral obligation to ensure that safe haven exists and always does. And so, from a faith-based I look at it as well. I think, I think God's called us to be there and be a good ally. But even if I didn't have a faith or that history, the practical part of it is Israel is the only democracy in that region. They share our values, and we have an obligation to stand by people who share our values.
Well, thank you for your public service.
Thank you.
For working with AIPAC and for everything that you do on Capitol Hill to support Israel.
It's my pleasure. I love doing it.
And thank you for joining us for this conversation. We'll see you next time.